Are you a life science professional? Stay on top of things and keep up with the rapid changes and innovations within the industry. Value Do engages with experts and peers on various life sciences topics. Join Life Sciences Value Share today.
Hi again, everybody. Welcome to the show. We are doing this three-part series with Michelle Werner, very close friend and a very thorough pharmaceutical executive. Welcome, Michelle. Welcome again to the show, and thanks for taking the time to do this entire series with us.
Thanks so much, Gaurav. It's a pleasure to see you again. I hope you've been well.
Likewise, you're all good, no complaints. So let's dive in. Just to give everybody a context, some background. We are doing this topic of evolving world of oncology, and what does that mean to the patients, to the payers, the clinicians, and how it has impacted or evolved the pharmaceutical executives' life and the life of pharma organizations, how they have evolved over a period of time, and that what could they do better. So with the same theme, we covered the view from a patient perspective, the clinician's perspective, and the payer perspective on our last episode. So if you missed that, you can take a look at view that episode and listen to that the wonderful kind of stories and experiences that Michelle shared. This is the second of the third series where we are going to focus more inward, at how executives like Michelle do and should stand up the oncology business units, how they can operate the business units, and what needs to be done to make the process agile with this constant state of launch of not only new oncology drugs, but the indications that come with every drug. So let me take a pause there, Michelle. Let you kind of elaborate a bit on the topic, the subtopic, and then we can jump into it.
So yeah, thanks, Gaurav. And I think that this is really a very exciting area for us to explore. And I will say, certainly as a pharmaceutical executive, have seen this really evolve as well over the course of the last decade. And I'd say even in particular in the last 5 years or so. And I would say one of the most important things to think about when you're in this constant state of launch, continuously bringing either new indications or new tumor types to market for any individual medicine, is really the first and foremost is how do we build agility and flexibility within our teams in order to be able to adapt to each and every new indication. I mean, as we talked about in the last episode, we talked about, how we're now in a position where, you launch in one space and then almost you're turning around the corner and you're just about to do it again. And that creates a lot of, stress on the system and our teams. And so for me as a leader, it's really been, what do I need to think about in order to make sure that the teams are resilient and that they're as agile as possible in order to be able to adapt and change to the climate in which we're in these days.
Right. So tell us more about teams being agile, and I've seen you really redesign the entire operating model of an OBU to just kind of make it a bit more agile. So tell us a bit about more about resilient teams and how to kind of get agility out of that system when you are in a big pharma sort of a machinery. And then anything you want to share about the operating model.
Sure. I mean, what I would say is, if I reflect back to the earlier stages of my career in the commercial space, I mean, frequently when we were preparing for launches, you'd start from the beginning. You'd have to think about the 101 things that you need to do in order to prepare for a successful launch. And you'd do that for your year or two prior to launch. You'd actually launch, you'd execute through the launch. And then, you'd move on to something new. And then meanwhile, the next team would prepare for another launch of another asset, and they would do the exact same thing. start from the very beginning, think about the 100 things that they need to do, and then go on from there. And the fact of the matter is that we can't afford that anymore.
Right.
We can't afford to reinvent the wheel each and every time. And now that launches are happening really just in a space of a few months, right? Between one and the next, sometimes even weeks in certain cases. You really can't start at the beginning every time. And so for me, it's really been my, an approach to take about how do we make sure that we create an organization that has the ability to focus on the depth of expertise on, the indication of the patient population or the tumor type that an individual launch is focused on. But at the same time, you have agility, especially in the areas that aren't unique from one launch to the next, whether it's, let's say, non-personal promotion or in medical education or things like that, where you're looking at specific channels that are going to be leveraged no matter what launch or what indication that you're bringing forward, where you have subject matter expertise in those arenas,
right.
But at the same time, you have depth of knowledge and expertise and insight that is really focused on the patient for that specific indication and tumor type. And for me, the best launches that we've done and where we've had the ability to pivot so quickly from one launch to the next is when you bring those two pieces together. So somebody who's coming with subject matter expertise where it's necessary, but somebody who also has the depth of knowledge about the specific medicine and tumor type that is really most important. That's helped us change dramatically the way that we think about putting together teams. So instead of having big launch teams that would do everything from, the expression soup to nuts from beginning to end, now we're leveraging launch teams that have maybe smaller in nature, but are also tapping into teams that are really focused on being excellent and delivering excellence in different channels, and having that then be applied to multiple teams, perhaps even simultaneously.
Right. And I mean, it's also about not getting everything set up internally, right? I guess somewhere the agility comes from, like you said, lean internal teams, but having the right partners to help you kind of get through this process, because like you said, the subject matter experts and the people who have depth in a certain kind of therapy area or disease area, great to have accountability in them, great to have them internally, but then identifying and partnering with the right external partners. And you mentioned a few of those external partners in the previous episode. Has that helped you, over a period of time? Have you kind of changed your perspective on that front? That has kind of given you more agility, or is it been the same?
I'm not entirely sure, right? I would say that I mean, absolutely, we're working with far more stakeholders than we've ever worked with before in the past, and we have a lot more partners and collaborators on many of these things as well. I would say yes. It's also, we've talked about patient advocacy groups and the role that they play in terms of making sure that we're disseminating information as best as possible through that channel to patients, and we certainly do that. I would not necessarily say that makes us more agile, but I do think that what it does is it's more groups and the channels in which we work. There definitely is, truth to what you said, though, in terms of really partnering with people who do have certain expertise. So, for example, one of the areas, especially from a commercialization perspective, we've seen evolve a lot over the course of the last 5 to 10 years, is the role that medical education plays. Now, when I started off in my career, we were doing medical education where pharma was taking the lead, putting up programs. They would be organized by members of our team, whether they were field-based individuals or office-based individuals. We'd invite lots of customers. They'd come or not come, and we'd put on a program that we hoped that would add value. Now we do things a little bit differently, right? Some of those programs are kind of like the archaic way of doing things in our industry. Now we're really looking at, how do we partner with medical education organizations that are really have a level of credibility in the content that they deliver. They work very closely with key opinion leaders that are specialists in any individual field, and they put on programs that are often in a virtual capacity, a little bit like we're talking today, Gaurav.
Correct.
And instead of us then, inviting a whole slew of customers that we think would like to participate in these programs, these med-ed organizations that have the reputation and the expertise of really delivering great content to clinicians is really how we're working these days in order to make sure that the education on new data and new innovations is where it needs to be. Yeah. That has absolutely changed. And it's changed the way that we think then about how do we organize ourselves as a team. No longer do we need teams of people creating all of this content, but we do need teams of people who understand what those channels are, what are the most relevant ones, where do we want to allocate our investment, and then making sure that they have all of the right information that they need in order to develop the content that's going to be relevant for customers.
Right. No, absolutely. And then, bringing it back a bit more inward, I still vividly remember, makes me nostalgic. And I quote those sort of deep dives on a lot of my conversations where you almost single-handedly brought medical marketing and market access together, to make these launches a bit more agile. There's just so much going on. Everybody's running in their own lanes. So how could we synergize? How could we just kind of work as a team? Obviously respecting the compliance and the regulatory, requirements. But there's just so much synergies that you had created. So tell us a bit more about that. I'm sure you have kind of taken that to a new level. Anything you want to share about medical marketing, market access, integration internally?
So I think this is an excellent point, Gaurav, right? And I think this is really where we've seen a big shift in not just what we do, but the way we do it within our industry. You're absolutely right. I'd say historically, the way that we would do things is, your sales and marketing teams would get together and they would do things, and actually it would mostly be the marketers. We're doing things quite differently now, right? And in the oncology world that we exist in today, which I think has been a necessity of, having, like I've said before on the first episode, like the golden era of innovation, having so many different launches and so many new indications that are coming in quick succession of each other.
Right.
What we really have found is that we've got to be, yes, of course, mindful of making sure that there is absolutely clear roles and responsibilities, and we're obeying, the guidance and not making sure that you're giving direction from one function to the other, but to really align on the principle of what are we trying to achieve? Like what is the overall strategy for a brand, and having that, or for one of our medicines, and making sure that we're aligning behind that, regardless of which function or which part of the organization that you're in, but then having a clear idea of, okay, well, if I'm in the commercial function, this is what I need to do with this one unified vision of what it is that we're trying to achieve, what experience we're trying to give our customers, what opportunities are we hoping that patients have to benefit from. And then each function has their own unique way of delivering towards that vision, but the vision is exactly the same.
Right.
And what we found is if you don't have that shared at the beginning, then you don't have the right approach in delivering a seamless experience on the outside. Correct. We've got to keep in mind that we put up structures within our pharmaceutical companies, all of us, that make sense for the way that our business operates. But when you're that customer on the outside, they only see you as being a representative of that company.
Right.
They don't see you as being from this function or that function and understand how they all intersect. They just say, well, you're the representative from this company. Why can't I get this information from you?
Right.
And so when you think about it, what that customer experience is, it also really, and what you want to drive towards, it really helps change the way that you think about internally, what your setup is and how do you want to work together, making sure that you have an appropriate communication channel between functions and that you're really delivering towards something in a unified way.
Right. So couple of questions come to mind, Michelle. Can you exemplify, let's only focus on customer engagement. Any particular example or work stream that comes to mind where you said, marketing on medical really came together to offer a substantially higher value to customer engagement?
So I would say that we're really doing it in a couple of areas. I would say, let me just first start with headquarters, right? From a headquarters perspective, for the most part, all the work that we're doing is in cross-functional teams. We're bringing each, function together at the table. We put the challenges that we're trying to adjust on the table. We discuss it together. We then think about, well, what's my responsibility for my function or to be able to address that challenge? And then we go and execute on it, right? And so that's like from an internal perspective, from a headquarters perspective, how it is that we're going about doing it. From a field-based perspective, it's similar, but in a different way. We're thinking about, well, these are our key customers and our key accounts. We think about, what's the appropriate amount of information that we want to be sharing from one function to the next. We make sure that there's a seamless and continuous kind of communication channel with our customer facing teams to make sure that where one person is leaving off, another person can seamlessly pick up in an appropriate way and carry on, so that it feels as though that it's really one organization and one company that is really interacting with that clinician. So that's generally how we try to do it. And of course, you've got to respect the certain guidance and make sure, like I said, that there is very clearly defined roles and responsibilities of who is accountable for what. But the communication and the connection points is really what matters the most.
Right. No, absolutely. Well said. And the second question was, what is the one challenge that comes to mind in you executing on that level of integration? Be it cultural, be it more capability level. So, what is that one challenge that you have faced or that comes to mind?
Well, I will definitely say, when we started thinking about these cross-functional teams, we've definitely had to overcome some hurdles about, like, does it really make sense? Is it really appropriate for us to be having one strategy, one vision for any particular medicine that we're bringing forward? Some of those conversations weren't, easy when we first started to have them. And then I think over time, people feel a lot more comfortable, especially when you think about it from a patient perspective and a customer perspective and doing the right thing that makes sense for them. So I would say that absolutely has been crucial. But the other thing that I would just say, and this is, getting back to the idea about, how do we build agility? How do we build resilience, right? Which is what I would say are the two, I'd say, I don't know if it's behaviors or values, right? That are really crucial in order to be able to support our teams. It is exactly that. It's like, what kind of support do we need to provide in order to make sure that teams have the ability to have the space to focus on what they need to do and can pivot when they need to, when they're going from one indication to the next. And for us as leaders, it means also thinking about, well, what are the things that I can be doing to stop and take off the plate of my team? How do I create more white space and thinking space in order for and to minimize bureaucracy in order for the teams to be as agile as possible? And that's also not easy to do, especially for big organizations that have really defined processes and procedures, all of which we need to get done. So there's a lot of work that I think we need to be thinking about, is not just what's new and what's different and what do we need to start, but we also need to spend just as much time thinking about what are the things that we need to stop doing, right?
Right.
And that's harder to do than it sounds.
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, totally agree. You know what? And I guess you rightly said, not doing some of these things leads you to some of these areas that that's like a huge opportunity cost for the customer. So I guess, taking those pauses and doing those prioritization exercises on a regular basis, it helps you as a leader focus, help your team focus, I would say, in the right direction, because I mean, the speed is so fast. It's difficult for you to, pause and consider or reconsider any new priorities when you are kind of chasing a launch or, these multiple constant state of launches. So that's helpful, Michelle. One more dimension I want to cover, because I know you have, spent time in the US Oncology organization, ex-US, and then global organization. I want to cover that dimension as well. What is your experience been across these two, if not three, different types of roles? I don't know if you want to answer that through the next point around capabilities, or do you want to cover it while we are covering people and teams?
Well, maybe I'll just touch on it a little bit,
sure,
now, Gaurav, and then we can go deeper on that at a later date.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, there are, first of all, some fundamentally different things that you think about when you're either in a geographically different place, whether it's the US or Europe or somewhere else, versus when you're in a global function. And I'll just say, from a global functional perspective, I mean, where you're really focused on is, what do you need to do to be thinking about driving value, not today, but in 3 years from now, 5 years from now. So a far more sort of longer term picture, strategic focus. You still think about launching a lot, but you're really thinking more about, like, what's the right sequence of indications, right? In order to make sure that physicians can really understand the role of the medicine in the treatment paradigm. But then you can also think about, well, what are the payer challenges that you might have in certain geographies by bringing one indication first instead of another, right? Mm-hmm. So it thinks like big macro kind of lens. When you're in a market like the US or one of our European markets, you think about it more from a micro perspective, right? Mm. What are the things that I need to do to drive a successful launch, like in that moment with that customer, with this indication that I have in hand? Some big differences, of course, I would say in the US, because of some of the regulations, you clearly have more freedom to operate, I'd say, when it comes to what you can do with and for patients directly. And that is, I think, really fantastic, because I do think that we are in a day and age where patients are more empowered and more educated and want to be more involved in their treatment journey, right? Mm-hmm. That's absolutely something that we spend a lot more time thinking about and focused on in the US. In let's say in our European markets or in other markets, I will say that we spend far more time thinking about what do we need to do to make sure that our medicines get reimbursed, that governments are going to want to list them on their formularies, and that patients will be able to get access to it. Because mm-hmm. when you're in a government payer market, which is most countries outside of the US, this is really at the crux of, any successful launch. You don't actually launch until you get reimbursement. Reimbursement becomes the number one priority. So it's a very different way of thinking about what your priorities are and how you need to focus. What I would also say is, just thinking more generally, right? One of the things that I would say has changed so dramatically in terms of the launches over the last 5 to 10 years, and you touched on it just a minute ago, and it brought it to my mind. We used to take an approach where you launched a medicine, you tried 100 different things, you figured out which one worked, and then you focus on it. We're not doing that anymore, right? We don't take that scattergun approach like we used to.
Right.
We think differently about how you prepare. What were the 2 or 3 most important must-win critical moments in order for us to really address? And you do 2 or 3 things really, really well. So instead of 100 things, it's few. So it's about that prioritization. It's about going deep to really understand what those 2 or 3 things are, and then doing it better than anybody else does them.
Yep. Cool. No, very well said, Michelle. So let's pivot a bit to capabilities. You spoke well about people and teams and how can we make them agile. Let's talk about how capabilities have evolved. And almost what are the must-have capabilities in today's world, without which an oncology business unit would not be able to operate the way it should for this sort of a customer experience?
So there are a few things, right, that I think are really critical. So I'd say, especially in this day and age, data and digital capabilities are absolutely important. We speak a lot about, we've talked a little bit in this series already about the role of digital channels and social media. A lot of that is really based on an understanding of, where customers are, what are the analytics that we need to understand in terms of like how they really want to access information and content, but then creating an experience, which we often call as an omni-channel experience, where we can bring together digital channels, face-to-face or person-to-person types channels in a very seamless way where the story can flow. And you really need data analytics and digital capabilities in order to do that well. So I'd say that's really one of the most important capabilities that we're looking for in this day and age. Then there are a few others that I would say are much more important now than perhaps ever have been. We talked a little bit about some of the challenges that come with being in the golden age of innovation in oncology, and the sort of added stress that might put on the healthcare systems and the payers as well.
Right.
We're thinking very differently about, well, what do we need to do? What are the teams that we need to put in place in order to be able to support that and from a field-based payer capability or a headquarter-based capability in order to prepare and then to execute and deliver and make sure that there's support both on the patient side and the practitioner side from where necessary. So that's definitely something that we're doing much more robustly in the last few years than we've ever done before in the past. And then I would say there's more specialized capabilities too. We talked a little bit about, now being a world where there's precision medicine and targeted therapies. So we're thinking very differently about, well, when you have a targeted therapy or you're working in a disease area where patients are bifurcating by different, let's say, genomic classifications, there's a different approach that you need to take in order to make sure that patients are adequately and appropriately getting identified so that they can be treated in a more optimal way than perhaps being kind of lumped together as one group of patients and getting, the same thing that everybody else is getting. It's getting much more personalized and much more specialized. And there are different capabilities that we're putting in place in order to really focus on what's that optimal support you need to give for precision medicines, making sure that the institutions are, prepared in order to be able to identify patients in the right way and test them for certain biomarkers and to make sure that they're getting treatment based on those tests.
Right.
So that's another thing. And then I'd say the last one, maybe not the last one. I mean, we can talk a lot of different capabilities that are really important. But another one that I would say is really about what are the patient support systems and services that we also need to be thinking about. Mm-hmm. And that could be in the form of, people like nurse educators who might be there in the field helping patients who are being prescribed one of our medicines and may need some additional support and information and education in order to have a good experience. But it could also be other support programs that we put in place in order to make sure that they have the information, that they are adhering and complying to their regimen, that they have access to the facilities and the support that they need in order to be able to have the most positive experience. So there's lots of things that we're doing there, which is very different than we've done before in the past. Right. So these are all, I'd say, emerging capabilities that I'd say, if you're going to be a leader in oncology, are really, really critical for institutions to adopt.
Right. No, I mean, that's helpful. I mean, couple of follow-up questions come to mind, one each for these two capabilities that you spoke about. The big data organization, the data capability, that has evolved drastically within a pharma organization. Any best practices or learning you want to share when it comes to that capability?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say, we used to have a model whereby, I'll just speak about our sales teams for a minute. We would get sort of general information about our customer universe. We'd come up with a segmentation. We'd come up with a deployment plan, and then our sales forces would go out and speak to those customers based on that deployment plan that was determined. Now it's very different. Now we're using a lot of different data and data sets in order to actually really help drive in the moment decisions about when somebody from our organization needs to be speaking to a customer in order to be able to have the best return on investment. So really using real-time information about what's happening in an individual practice, what's happening with patients that are being seen within that practice, and using that as the real fuel for the deployment model. Right. So we're not using this, kind of generic customer data anymore. We're really talking about looking at nearly real-time data in order to be able to determine, do you see Dr. A or do you see Dr. B today? Because it'll make all the difference about whether or not you're more likely to have the impact that you intend to have.
Yeah. And then, I mean, that kind of space is evolving by the day, because you see a lot of trigger programs. You're almost kind of helping the clinicians and the patients to even identify, where is the journey going? Can they help them diagnose some of these ailments earlier, based on some of these records and some of their past history and trends, and then from a pharma perspective, putting that in perspective and basically creating programs that involve a lot of machine learning, artificial intelligence to help with the entire customer journey over a period of time, where exactly the interventions need to be, what type of intervention would help, and basically continuous learning from patient to patient.
That's exactly right. And what we're seeing is, these I'll say cottage industries kind of pop up to support this type of capability, right? And again, we talked a little bit about, what do you need to do in-house versus what is it that you need to outsource? And this is another thing as well. I mean, pharmaceutical company are, we're really great at manufacturing innovative medicines and distributing them amongst the world. Data and digital and analytics capabilities, we can be okay at, but we're never going to be as good as some of the real experts in this space. So this is another area as well that, we can debate about, but sometimes when you're partnering in these areas, you can really get the best of that expertise, right, marry it with the two different parties, and then you can deliver a much more optimal experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's best to play to your competency, right? Why wouldn't you kind of create that competency that's already available? Why would you kind of spend 10 years in building that competency when that's not your core competency? Like you said, the pharma company, why to kind of become a data company? So no, absolutely. And the second element I wanted to kind of ask a question around was, the precision medicine and the nurse educator organization. So we have spent some time, working on different programs together on these programs where We have stood up that entire capability, and we have seen a lot of challenges in the reception of that entire capability, both internally as well as externally. So what exactly do these guys do? What exactly do the nurse educators do? So what is the role of diagnostic liaisons? Are they medical affairs people? Are they MSLs, or are they reps, or don't understand? So, and that's been a dilemma both internally, when a rep looks at these customer facing roles within the precision medicine organization, say, okay, what exactly are you doing here? How are you supporting me? How are you supporting my customer? And then the customer is a bit unsure. How are these roles different from what an MSL does for me, or what a rep does for me? Any thoughts there?
So this is where I would say, internally, what I would say is this is where, and I mentioned it before, like really clearly identifying what the roles and responsibilities are is absolutely crucial, right? So, for example, you talk about precision medicine, for let's say our field-based diagnostic liaisons, these are individuals who, are seeing oftentimes very different customers. So instead of focusing on oncologists, they're focused on a pathologist, they're focused on the laboratories, making sure that there's quality testing in place, making sure that they understand what they need to do when they can, start the behavior of reflex testing for a specific, let's say, biomarker upon diagnosis. It's different than what a sales rep does. It's different than what a medical affairs liaison would do. Because it's a very specialized, nuanced skill. It's really focused on a specific customer. It kind of gets back to the point that we talked about in the last episode, Gaurav, about the real role of the multidisciplinary teams and thinking about all the various different stakeholders that are really, really important in order to make sure that the patient can get the best care that they possibly can get.
Right.
And so that's one example of where, yes, of course, that might create some kind of tension, dynamic tension at times. But I think when you think about it in that perspective and you think about like, okay, what are the clear roles and responsibilities? They're not really, like, a diagnostic liaison is not really talking about the medicine at all. They're really talking about the biomarker, or the test, or the testing practice, or, whatever it is, the quality of the test, how to interpret the results, what do they need to do with those results, those kinds of things, which is very different. But it also provides a huge amount of value, especially when you're talking about innovation that is fundamentally changing the way patients are going to be segmented and identified. It's just, it's quite different than how it was before in the past.
Yeah. And you would agree, I guess it's a coefficient of time. I mean, because that role is not like readily available. We do not have these experts who are diagnostic liaisons, who are trained diagnostic liaisons, and you can just kind of hire them like you hire the reps and the MSL, right? I guess so. There's a lot of training and a development that is required to do the role, to play the role that you just said. Because playing that role and helping with the assessment and the diagnostics, and how to engage with those customers and how to provide value to basically get the continuum going, it's not easy, right? So it's not a role that has been there for like 4 decades, and there are like thousands of diagnostic liaison experts out there. So would you agree to that?
Absolutely. There's no question about it. This is where I would say that we've certainly had that same experience where you really have to start with, what's the problem you're trying to solve? What's the customer problem that you're trying to solve? Or what's the patient problem that you're trying to solve? And like, just on this particular topic, the patient problem is, I get diagnosed with lung cancer. I have no idea if I am an EGFR type or if I'm not. And I need to, I'm the patient. I don't know that even those two things are important. So you start with a place of, okay, how do we help make sure that a patient can get, we can figure this out. We can identify, are they in category A or are they in category B? Right. And this is where we've really had to just, create a whole new function in order to be able to prepare for that. What I would also say is, especially we're talking about precision medicine, and I've had the privilege of working on several targeted therapies in my career. We also have to think about, like, what's the role of, let's say, a pharmaceutical manufacturer in order to be able to drive precision medicine versus what's the role of the, let's say, the diagnostic partner that we might be working with in order to, bring a new test or new biomarker assay to the market. It's different, right? And a lot of companies think, well, maybe it's really the responsibility of our biomarker partners or diagnostics partners to do this, or maybe it's not, right? And I think when you think about it, right, from a pharmaceutical perspective, and this was a big learning for me over the course of my career, is the pharmaceutical manufacturer really needs to take accountability for this, right? The business models of a diagnostic company and a pharmaceutical company are, quite frankly, fundamentally different.
Right.
And if we're not taking responsibility for making sure that patients can be appropriately assessed and identified, nobody is going to do it.
Yeah.
So that's where this role really came about.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point you make, Michelle, because you know what, and we have seen pharma manufacturers taking accountability having a very good rub-off effect on the diagnostics industry. I mean, I don't want to kind of put it that way, but diagnostic industry has evolved suddenly, over a period. I mean, there's just been a explosive growth in the diagnostic industry, not because they organically or planned for it, but because, pharma sort of took accountability and said, this landscape is changing. We need to deliver this value. We cannot, just because this is an important and a pivotal part of that entire patient journey, the assessment, and with the targeted therapies and gene therapies coming to play. So yeah, no,
right.
and
that's patient outcomes are on the line, right? Because we know patients will do better if they have a specific type of cancer. They should have a specific type of medicine to address Absolutely. It. We've learned that in time. And so I think we also have a responsibility from a patient perspective to make sure that happens as well as it can.
Yep. No, absolutely. So we spoke about people and teams, the agility, that how can we bring agility. We spoke about, very important key capabilities that an oncology business unit needs to kind of bring in or keep evolving and do continuous improvement on. Anything else that comes to mind from an inward-looking perspective, where you have seen, you've gone to different oncology business units, this is the part that is missing. This is something that needs to be refined. Anything else from a process perspective or culture perspective?
I mean, I would say a couple of things. I don't know about missing, but I would say is quite different. I mean, it's more complex these days. Launching an oncology medicine is a lot more complex these days than it was 10 years ago, or 20 years ago when I even started. It takes more investment, right, and preparation. But I would say what it really comes down to is truly having a depth of knowledge and insight into what's really happening in the external world, and being able to leverage that appropriately. The diseases are more complex. The treatment paradigms are more complex. The competitive field is a lot more complex than it used to be. And all of these things really, factor into, what it is that we need to do to prepare, the investment that it takes in order for us to get ready. And so that's something that we need to be mindful of as companies as well, to make sure that we're really set up for success and putting our best foot forward.
Yeah. No, cool. That's very helpful, Michelle. Any final thoughts before we close this episode? And we want to kind of cover the go-to-market approaches on the next one. I think it's going to be a right segue now that we have discussed the people, teams, the capabilities, and the investment point. Anything else you want to highlight? Any any fallacy that you have heard about or you've come across, or any myths that you want to talk about from building an oncology organization perspective?
Well, maybe we'll talk about this when we go to the go-to-market, but I'll just say, when you say myths, right? This is where I would say, we used to live in a world in the oncology space where, the data was the data and the data sold the medicine. That is not true anymore.
Awesome.
So yeah, I think that's something that we'll be able to have a good chat about when we meet.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's a great closure. I don't want to speak anything beyond this. So that's a great way to close this one. So thank you, Michelle, again for joining, and thank you, viewers, for joining today with Michelle.
My pleasure. Good seeing you again, Gaurav.
Yeah, likewise.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Life Sciences Value Share with Gaurav Kandhari. We invite you to visit valuedoconsulting.com/podcast for additional resources and to access the notes to today's episode. Join us again soon and invite your peers and colleagues.